I'm a metabolic physician and a clinical geneticist, and for over 30 years I've been involved in the diagnosis and management of children with rare genetic disorders. And I'm sorry if this slide is confronting, but I've really put it here to make the point that children with genetic disorders can get very sick very quickly. And one of the most frustrating things we have to deal with is trying to get to a diagnosis as quickly as possible, because that influences how we can treat these children. So how many people have watched episodes of House and tried to get the esoteric diagnosis before he did? Well, I can tell you now with genomic medicine, we can do that. Catherine's already talked about the wonderful advances in genomic medicine that are happening here at the Institute. And the standard turnaround time is around 3 months to get a genomic result. It is possible to ramp that up and get a result in a 3-week period. And this is an example of where that has demonstrated the great value in being able to do that. So this little boy presented at 5 months of age with muscle weakness and seizures. He had a long period of time of invasive investigations that ultimately led to a clinical diagnosis of Leigh disease, which is a really devastating disorder that's usually fatal in childhood. Genomic diagnosis revealed that in fact he had a genetic abnormality of the thiamine transporter. Thiamine is vitamin B1. And so that immediately meant to the clinical team that implementing vitamin B1 therapy could be a potential benefit. Very expensive treatment, as you can see here. And in fact, with vitamin B1 therapy, further progression of the disease stopped. And I think even more gratifying was he had a younger sister who turned out to have the same genetic changes and so would have been predicted to go down this course. But with treatment of vitamin B1 from the outset, she's been prevented from developing disease. So that's a really wonderful advance. So we want to step that up a notch. Catherine has talked about Australian genomics, and this was a really fantastic platform for us to develop one of the disease flagships, the acute care flagship. And so what we're aiming to do here is to be able to deliver a genomic diagnosis in under 5 days to the sickest of children, those in the neonatal and paediatric intensive care units. And so that means we need to establish the processes to be able to do that in an efficient and effective way. And importantly, we need to evaluate whether what we're doing is of clinical effectiveness as well. So in terms of delivering a genomic diagnosis to a sick child in a very short space of time, there are lots of challenges that need to be considered in delivering this, and there are lots of questions we need to answer to be able to convince policymakers and funders that this should become standard of care. So where are we up to? This just demonstrates that this is a national project, and you can see we have 11 neonatal intensive care units and 6 paediatric intensive care units involved. And just to remind you, we're aiming for an under 5 days turnaround time. So our results so far, we've been able to undertake 64 of these studies since the beginning of this year, and in fact we've approved 2 more this afternoon that are currently underway. And we have a 50% diagnostic rate, which I think is a superb outcome. And on top of that, we've been able to do this with an average 79-hour turnaround time, so just over 3 days. And this is really a testament to the clinical and the laboratory teams that have been involved, that have been able to pull together and make this happen. But I think equally importantly, what we've been able to show is that in those where a genetic diagnosis was made, we've been able to change management in 50% of cases. And in half of cases, the diagnosis meant that we could advise the families that they had a high recurrence risk, and so we could restore reproductive confidence in those families. So this is one of the children who has been through our acute care flagship. So this little boy was weak from birth, had breathing difficulties, and because of that he had numerous admissions over the first 10 months of his life, ultimately leading to an ICU admission. He had ultra-rapid sequencing done, and we identified the cause of his problem to be a gene called COLQ. I don't have time to go into the biology of that, but immediately knowing that, we were able to recommend a treatment that could be implemented, another cheap one, Ventolin. And that has led to a very significant clinical improvement, and he's not had any further admissions over the last few months since the treatment was implemented. But again, these are genetic disorders, there are family consequences, and we have information that he has 2 cousins in Pakistan who have a very similar clinical story, are likely to have the disorder, and so that means they will be able to have access to Ventolin therapy once the genetic diagnosis is confirmed. So I think with regards to acute care genomics, it's here now, it's definitely a game changer, and our big challenge is going to be to convince policymakers and fund holders that this really needs to be standard of care. Thanks very much.